Wow, he really just went out and said it. Jeff Bezos, a plutocrat, the second richest man on earth, the guy who runs Amazon, also runs the Washington Post, one of the most influential newspapers in the United States, arguably in the entire world. And yesterday, he made an announcement which confirmed all of the things that many of us have long said. Just like Donald Trump at the moment is taking away all of the pretenses about US imperialism. Truly, we live in the age of they're saying the quiet part out loud. And what he said underlines why we don't live in a real democracy and never have, no matter what we've been told. In a tweet yesterday, Bezos said he'd shared a note with the Washington Post team, as he calls them, about a change coming to our opinion pages. In his words, this is what he says. We are going to be writing every day in support and defense of two pillars, personal liberties and free markets. We'll cover other topics too, of course, but viewpoints opposing those pillars will be left to be published by others. He goes on to say, there was a time when a newspaper, especially one that was a local monopoly, might have seen it as a service to bring to the reader's doorstep every morning a broad-based opinion section that sought to cover all views. Today, the internet does that job. What's extremely funny, to be honest, is what he says next. I am of America and for America and proud to be so. Our country did not get here by being typical. And a big part of America's success has been freedom in the economic realm and everywhere else. Freedom is ethical. It minimizes coercion, and practical. It drives creativity, invention, prosperity. Freedom minimizes coercion, he solemnly declares in a statement by a plutocrat ordering his newspaper to stop publishing opinions he doesn't agree with. Come on. That is genuinely extremely funny. It's funny too because he declares that he's confident that free markets and personal liberties are right for America. Personal liberties, right for America, but not right for the editors of the Washington Post opinion section. And I should note, by the way, just more broadly, talking about coercion and freedoms. I mean, the truth is, if you're a worker, for example, working for Amazon, then you're not free. You are subject to the whims of your bosses, of your managers. It is a coercive environment in which to live. Amazon warehouses are not bastions of freedom and personal liberty. Quite the opposite. Capitalism, in that way, in the way it makes us, if you like, in industry after industry, at the beck and call of the whims of those above us, it takes away people's basic freedoms. Now, anyway, he told his opinion editor all this, David Shipley, that he was going to coerce him into restricting the range of opinions published, restricting his personal liberty to choose which columns he's going to publish. The guy resigned, fair play to him. A few things here. Personal liberties and free markets are just code for economic policies which favour extremely rich people like Jeff Bezos. This guy runs a newspaper and he wants it to be a propaganda rag which convinces ordinary citizens that economic policies which rig society in favour of people like Jeff Bezos is actually in the interests of the majority. As for free markets, Bezos is the living embodiment of this sham. A useful website tracks how much public subsidies Amazon benefits from, in turn lining the pockets of Jeff Bezos. It turns out his company has benefited from subsidies worth $11.6 billion and counting, in the United States, that is. His Blue Origin space company also benefited from tens of millions of dollars worth of public subsidies. Bernie Sanders, the left-wing senator, led the fight against Congress bailing out altogether. Now, Jeff Bezos also makes dosh from taxpayers the world over. Public contracts he's been awarded include for the Ministry of Defence here in the UK this year, while in 2022 it was reported he'd been handed £425 million worth of British government contracts in the space of just 2 years. The same people who like to decry what they call the evils of big government are the same ones lapping at the teats of government. Apologies for the imagery there. This underlines the nature of our economic system. Socialism for the rich, capitalism for the poor. The state is rolled back when it comes to struggling Americans or Brits, but it provides the ultimate safety net for corporate giants. For the average Joe, it's sink or swim. For the rich, the position of the state is, we are at your service. What Jeff Bezos really wants is a newspaper which promotes the idea that cutting taxes on the rich and, flogging public assets to billionaires benefits all of society. The fact the economic system has failed, American wages for so many workers have stagnated, contradicts that claim. But he wants a newspaper that tries to brainwash people into believing otherwise, to going against their own lived experience. Now, it should be noted that Jeff Bezos ordered the Washington Post to violate its history of endorsing the Democrats in the last election. That decision came the same day that executives from his aerospace company met with Donald Trump. He claimed that was a coincidence and his decision wasn't driven by business interests. Well, in any case, the decision led to around 250,000 cancelling their Washington Post subscriptions. He's also shelled out a vast sum to make a documentary about Melania Trump, and his Earth Fund halted funding for an initiative monitoring companies' decarbonisation. Both decisions widely understood as Bezos bowing down before Donald Trump. Now, his decision at the Washington Post has caused widespread anger. Jeff Stein, the chief economics reporter, tweeted, "Massive encroachment by Jeff Bezos into the Washington Post opinion section today makes clear dissenting views will not be published or tolerated. I still have not felt encroachment on my journalism on the news side of coverage, but if Bezos tries interfering with the news side, I will be quitting immediately and letting you know." Well, look, what Bezos has done is a real service hit. He's proven us right. There were those of us who've long said that rich moguls own newspapers in order to promote political agendas which benefit their own interests. Bezos bought the Washington Post for $250 million back in 2013, a fraction of what it had been worth a decade earlier, because it was a sound investment. He wanted it for political influence. That's always been the case. As the British media mogul Lord Beaverbrook told the Royal Commission on the Press in 1948, he ran the Daily Express newspaper purely for the purpose of making propaganda and with no other object. I look at it as a purely propagandist project. I do actually appreciate it when they're that candid. I think more of them should be that truthful. Now, notably back in 2013, all 175 newspapers around the world owned by Rupert Murdoch just coincidentally all supported the invasion of Iraq, which turned out to be a tremendous success. And indeed, we've seen how media oligarchs cheerlead for their country's foreign policy, as of late, throwing their weight behind Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people. Indeed, owning newspapers also buys political influence directly, as the Russian media mogul Evgeny Lebedev, whose family owned The Independent, or do they still do? I can't remember. I used to work for The Independent. I don't know. He did. And that was the case as well for the Evening Standard. I don't know if that's still the case. But anyway, he did own those newspapers. As he candidly put it, it's unreasonable to expect individuals to spend millions on newspapers and not have access to politicians. In the US, there are 6 media companies which own the vast majority of all media in the country. We don't live in a real democracy. That's because even though almost all adults have a vote, those with wealth are the ones with power. Society is rigged in favour of a tiny elite who run entire countries as profit-making enterprises at the expense of the majority who live there. Here's a clip which has been circulating on Twitter in response to Bezos' announcement. It's the late Jimmy Reid, who was an iconic Scottish trade unionist and socialist. And he said this back on national television with Michael Parkinson in 1973.
We've got freedom of the press in this country. But in order, I've got the same freedom as Sir Max Aitken. The only thing is, he's a multimillionaire, right, that has a newspaper, right? So he can exercise that freedom of the press that's there and dictate editorials that are in line with his ideological thinking. For me and for all of these people, it's an abstract freedom. And I think when we talk about freedom, we should get from abstractions to reality. Let me put this point. You go and knock on an old age pensioner's door, and they come there and you say, "How are you getting on, old man?" He says, "Terrible." And incidentally, let's face it, there was an old woman in Liverpool who was found in her house, choked to death because she was eating cardboard. And in the same paper, we had some other fellow, Norbury Enterprises, spent £500,000 on an aeroplane. £500,000 with 3 bedrooms in his aeroplane. You go to the old age pension and you say, "Well, look, Pop, okay then, you're having a hard time of it. You've only got a few quid. Yes, I can't even get tobacco. You're not eating too well. No, I hardly see meat." You say, "Don't worry, you're free." The old fella probably say, "I'm free to starve." Now, I tell you, let's take Shelley's Mask of Anarchy, where he talks about what is freedom. Freedom also is to have the freedom to bring up your children in such a way as to realise their full potential, to be free from the fear of poverty, to be free from the fear of war. These are freedoms which I find establishment politicians never talk about. And the woman's quite right. The freedom of choice that you're talking about in a whole vast area is non-existent for the great majority of working class people in this country. Therefore, it's an abstraction.
Well, indeed. The freedoms granted under capitalism are often just abstractions, except for the elite. Is this really the ideal system? If you were going to design a society from scratch, is this what you'd come up with? The system is falling apart. It's unable to provide security and prosperity for so many. That's led to the rise of the likes of Donald Trump and other right-wing populists. They tell you the reason your life's getting harder is because of migrants, refugees, Muslims, you get the gist, rather than a society rigged in favour of a tiny few, people like Donald Trump. Until we fix that, humanity's future is looking pretty bleak. Please like and subscribe with your thoughts and your comments. All opinions welcome. I won't censor them. You can help us expand to take on this awful media ecosystem. We're not run by billionaires. Patreon.com/OwenJones84. Listen to us on the podcast that's now fixed. I'll speak to you in a bit.